Okay. So this is the Pathway for Planetary Health Forum with Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn, and I'm Jonathan Rose on growing the common good. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us for the Garrison Institute Forum series on Pathways to Planetary Health. The meditation teacher, author, clinician, and pioneer of the mind-body medicine, Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn. I'm Jonathan Rose. I am the co-founder of the Garrison Institute. Today's seminar forum talk was supposed to be for an hour, but John and I had so much to talk about, we may go to an hour and a half. So you're welcome to stay with us as long as you want, but just to know that it may go a little bit longer. Before we begin today's session, let's review a few of the logistical items. We're in a Zoom webinar, so participant, that means you, audio and video will remain off during the duration of the webinar. Please, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A box. That's the little thing on the lower right. And we'll try and weave those into our conversation towards the end. Well, also, this is being recorded, and you'll have a chance to view the recordings as well as schedule of updated programs on upcoming programs on garrisoninstitute.org. This forum is part of a continuing series of the Garrison Institute's Forum on Pathways to Planetary Health, which is an outgrowth of the Garrison Institute's Climate, Mind, and Behavior program. It is now my pleasure to introduce our guest, Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn. He's a scientist, a writer, a meditation teacher, engaged in bringing mindfulness into the mainstream of medicine and society. He's the founder of mindfulness-based stress reduction clinic at the University of Massachusetts Medical School and the Center for Mindfulness in Medicine, Healthcare, and Society. He's an author of best-selling books such as Full Catastrophe Living, Using Wisdom of Your Body and Mind to Face Stress, Pain, Illness, and Wherever You Go, Wherever You Go, There You Are. Mindfulness meditation in everyday life. I should be more mindful about reading those things. John, we are so grateful to have you join us.
Really good to be here, Jonathan.
Great. So let's dive right in. So I want to start with a question, which is, how can you be healthy when you feel that the world is unhealthy?
You can't, is the short answer. That's why a certain amount of engagement and responsibility is absolutely necessary. And of course, it's taken us a long time in medicine to learn that self-responsibility is an important part of maintaining health across the lifespan. But by the same token, as your question is suggesting, no matter what you do, no matter what you eat, no matter how much you exercise, no matter how much you keep your body and your mind in some kind of regulatory, creative equilibrium, you can't be healthy in an unhealthy world. If the air is polluted, as it is in so many different parts of the world, where it's on any given day, it's virtually toxic to breathe the air. To say nothing of work sites where it's even more toxic. If the water is polluted, there are so many different ways in which, if the soil is polluted, there's so many different ways in which our organism depends on all sorts of collaborative streams of material biocycles moving through us, that it's virtually impossible to be entirely healthy in an unhealthy world. We're lucky to be as healthy as we are. And the question is, to some degree, on the medicine and healthcare side, how can we optimize our own individual health and being? But then the conversation for today really has to do with, okay, yes, that's all extremely important, but how can we actually take care of the planet? Because we as a species have given the planet a fever, as everybody now knows, and it's kind of like virtually on the verge of being an out of control fever, that will not be so easy to regulate. And so not only what is our responsibility here, but what is our ability to respond here in ways that actually bring us into some kind of equilibrium that maximizes well-being and health, and including the health of the biosphere, the planet itself, and minimizes harm. And we are so capable out of ignorance or out of belligerence and self-interest to misperceive self-interest to generate enormous amounts of harm, violence in every shape and form. And so this engagement is really a profoundly ethical engagement. And we need to sort of underscore that from the very beginning.
All right. Yes, by the way, it is a deeply ethical question. And we'll return to that because it's really interesting. We live in a society, I think, that doesn't have a coherent set of ethics, so that we don't know where we're going. But I want to just pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned. So one is you've said essentially that individual health cannot take place without collective health, or a subject of this series, planetary health, that they're all deeply relational. So I want you to talk about relationality itself as a foundational quality of life, but it's even more than life, the foundational quality of the universe.
Having trained in my youth as a molecular biologist, this was a question that was really of interest to me ever since I was a child, growing up in a scientific and artistic family. The whole question of the nature of life and how any individual, let's say myself, am in relationship to the rest of life, what is possible to learn and to know and to contribute to. So the whole thing is a certain kind of an adventure in inquiring into who we are, what the nature of awareness is, because without awareness, we would have, we'd basically be robotic-like beings that we just kind of like at the mercy of external forces that we have no comprehension of. And so to be able to drop into the deeper aspects of our own potentiality, our own possibility, our own emergence into the fullness of life across the lifespan, it's absolutely essential that we learn how to befriend ourselves, that we actually recognize and befriend the multidimensional nature of our being. And one aspect that's never taught in school, but that is so absolutely fundamental, is awareness itself, pure awareness. And that's what the word mindfulness really means when you unpack it completely. When you drill right down to it, in all the meditative traditions, what we're cultivating by paying attention on purpose in the present moment and not getting caught so much in reactivity and judgmental stuff going on, which of course we're always caught in, then we're learning to inhabit a space, just like the space of like outer space, the space of our own minds and hearts, which when you learn this in kindergarten or in daycare or whatever, because a lot of us, we're all born with it, but then it gets squeezed out of us in a certain way. We begin to recognize that awareness is itself boundless. And yet it's a form of intelligence that is so much bigger than thought, because you could take any thought, including the boundlessness of the universe or awareness, and hold that thought in awareness. So it, de facto proof that the awareness trumps, I don't want to use that verb, but
expand,
is bigger than, can contain any thought, no matter how profound. So this is a human capacity that we're all born with. And if the proverbial stuff is hitting the proverbial fan on a planetary level in so many different ways at this particular moment, then we need to be able to recruit all of our interior human resources to bring to this problem. And the beauty of awareness is that, I use the word interior resource, but it transcends inner and outer. It transcends interior and exterior. So when we are in awareness, we are in deep relationship with the entirety of the universe, including other people, other embodied beings, animals and plants and the sky and the air and the water and the light. And then all of a sudden you begin to see that we're living in a domain that is not, that is denatured in every sense of the word when we try to understand it merely with the beautiful cognitive capacity that we have. That's incredibly beautiful, but we need other forms of intelligence online as well. And that's how we cultivate them, through intentional attending and learning how to inhabit or dwell, if you will, in the space of your own awareness, which you don't have to get or fabricate, because you're born with it. All of us are born with this capacity for awareness. So we're not generating awareness, we're learning how to access it, because it gets kind of grown over with thorns and weeds and stuff, because we get so seduced by thinking and wanting and pursuing and rejecting.
So you want to give us an example of how we can access this awareness?
Yeah, I think that I'd like to suggest that, actually, since the topic here is mindfulness in relationship to planetary health, that at least we pose the possibility that this Zoom dialogue or inquiry that we're engaging in together, but with hundreds of other people, that the entire unfolding of this clock time together is itself a meditative inquiry. So that it's not like we have to close our eyes and sit in a particular posture and tune into one aspect of our experience, say breath sensations or whatever in the body. We will do that, but let's at least posit the possibility that if we're attending to this dialogue between you and me in a particular way, whoever is doing the attending is as much a part of this dialogue through the attending, through the listening, through that sensorium. So we're all part of a larger whole, and we're bathing in a field of inquiry, of knowing, but held within a much larger not knowing, a sort of questioning, a kind of deep listening for maybe aspects of possibility that haven't emerged yet. And so incredibly creative and imaginative. And I would say that given the level of threat that we're facing on a planetary level, we need all the creativity and imagination that we can get. So I just want to say, no matter how grandiose the title of our dialogue is, that it's not you and me providing, the sort of sanctum of wisdom for the entire rest of the world. This is much more an invitation for all of us to engage in a deep, deep, and fairly rigorous and disciplined inquiry into what is called for now, given that I'm a participatory universe in this larger universe of participation. So that said, we can let every moment between my words and the silence between my words and what the words are inviting or pointing you to simply drop into the space of your own body, which itself is a gigantic mystery and universe that is over 99.99% empty space when you get down to the quantum level. And even if you're at the level of atoms and molecules and macromolecules, it's almost all empty space. And it's unthinkable numbers of atoms. And even at the level of neurons in the brain, north of 100 billion neurons and hundreds of trillions of connections in the brain and moving throughout the body with the nervous system, all of which are continually changing on the basis of moment by moment experience and across the lifespan. And so a manifestation for a short period of time that we call a lifetime of a constellation of atoms, all of which were either born in the Big Bang, if it's hydrogen, or in the exploding of supernova for all the other elements of the periodic table that constellate this universe that we call the human body. And that we can actually be aware of it as we sit here, lie here, stand here, whatever posture the body's in. Experiencing the envelope of the skin and a sense of the body as a whole, sitting here breathing. And so a continual exchange of air from the outside with the universe at the inside. That oxygen in the air, very hard, and it took billions of years for life to give birth to enough oxygen on the planet to be able to drive or run the energy that our brains require. That oxygen, comes into the body through the lungs. We know this through COVID and how easy it is for the lungs to actually be, assaulted to the point where they can no longer actually do their work. And that oxygen binds to hemoglobin molecules in the blood, giant proteins that carry a set of porphyrin rings that bind, that have iron at the center of them and that bind the oxygen and carry it to every one of the billions and billions of cells throughout your body. It's like a miracle, just on one in-breath. And on the next out-breath, giving it back out to the universe and taking in the next breath. And we're only one breath away from actually not being alive. And we take this miracle for granted across the lifespan. So for now, in this timeless moment we call now, can we just feel the breath moving in and out of the body without pushing it or pulling it, but just letting yourself be breathed and resting in awareness of the body, sitting here breathing. And if you will, riding on the waves of your own breathing, this in-breath for the full duration of the breath coming in, the pause, the reversal, the out-breath, the pause at the trough of the out-breath, and then the next in-breath, all being taken care of for you. We say I'm breathing, but it's much more accurate to recognize or realize that really we're being breathed. We breathe through our sleep. We breathe through distraction, through all sorts of things. So even when it comes to this gigantic level of mystery and wonder and awe at the connectivity of it all. And as we rest in awareness in this way, what we're actually experiencing is relationality. How we are in relationship to this body, to this breath, to this timeless moment we call now. How are we in relationship to silence, stillness, the flourishing of being aware? The beyond conceptual recognition of how profoundly interconnected this body is, and this moment is, and this mind is with virtually everything inwardly and outwardly in the world. Our body's 84% by weight water, H2O. As the world experiences more and more water shortages in certain places, I mean, there comes a time when we can't even grow crops. It's in the New York Times today, generating a lot of political anger that can explain some of the madness that we're seeing around the body politic. The miracle of this breath coming in, and how important it is that this breath not be filled with toxins from fires burning all over the place due to global warming. What a privilege it is to have pristine air. And can you recognize it when you have it? Not just when you're in national parks or in the Arctic or someplace where, you know, the experience is so profoundly vivid, but with this breath, in this moment, wherever you are. And so dropping underneath my words to whatever degree you can, so that even though there is a string of words and you may or may not be following what's being said and pointed out, pointed to, there's this sense of being completely at home and completely whole, W-H-O-L-E, right in this moment. And this wholeness is a characteristic of each one of our being, and it's never not accessible unless we get lost in thought, carried away, diverted, or divert ourselves through seizures of various kinds of anxiety or depression, or, you know, sort of all sorts of diseases of thought and despair, or, you know, or greed and hatred for that matter, that obliterate our access to the boundless spaciousness of open-hearted presence, where there's no separation between kindness and wakefulness, because we immediately perceive the interconnectedness of all things. And so even self and other becomes a contrivance, kind of grammatic or literary habit that prevents us from understanding the nature of relationality, of interconnectedness, of our being flowering, a flowering of life, and we're all different cells of the one body of the planet, not separate and not even viable without each other, and without these cycles of planetary homeostasis and allostasis of the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle and the, you know, water and air and photosynthesis, where the chlorophyll is basically also has porphyrin rings, and they capture sunlight, and the porphyrin molecules in the leaves, instead of iron like in hemoglobin, they have magnesium, and they capture sunlight, and that's how we live. Without plants capturing the sunlight, there's no way for animals or animal life to live on this planet. Unless you're a sulfur-eating bacterium at the bottom of the sea. So relationality is the coin of the realm. It's our birthright. It's, when all is said and done, the algebra and the geometry of reality, way beyond merely human or merely animal or merely plant or even merely mineral reality. And although that's a big thought, we can hold it in awareness as an actuality. And it can guide us in terms of action, wise action, selfless action, compassionate action for the benefit of a greater good, so to speak, rather than more for me, or protect myself at the expense of, and you fill in the blank. When those kinds of thoughts arise in the mind, they can be welcome. They put the welcome mat out. We all have them. We all are self-centered. But that's a yoga of its own. We can expand the centered part to so big that the self just dissolves. And then there's just spaciousness and the recognition of the beauty of all beings, the intrinsic beauty of all life forms and the magic and mystery of it. And how deeply embedded we are in it, in our language, in our listening, in our poetry, in our music, in our wonder, and in our dependency on all these planetary cycles. So it's an all hands on deck moment, and I would invite you, if your eyes have been closed, to open them. And let me just suggest, as this time together continues to unfold, that there's no separation between a formal meditation practice like what I've just guided us through and life itself. So even as your eyes open, it doesn't mean the meditation is coming to an end, because there's no end to this meditation. That meditative awareness can become, in some sense, our default mode, so we can bring it into every aspect of our lives. Whatever we're doing, whatever relationships we're in, can we not denature or reject or forget our capacity for open-hearted presence, for wakefulness, for mindfulness? Can we remember to remember in relationality, and then see it manifest in ways that breathe life into, and in some sense, you might say even breathe a poetic energy into the world that motivates us to care and to give and to deliver the full dimensionality of who we are, instead of not trusting our own beauty.
That is beautiful, John. I want to ask you about this amazing work that's growing about trees. So what we're seeing is that a forest is connected at the roots with these beautiful array of fibers, which are fungi, and the fungi, basically, the trees feed the fungi because they create carbohydrates through the photosynthesis, and they send it down through the roots. And then the fungi act as a neural system. So there's this deep interdependence between them. And the neural systems can be quite dense, and we actually can track even pulses and the action potentials that go along these, in effect, neural pathways. So remember, these are independent fungi that are like acting like other people's neurals in neurology.
Yeah.
But we can see that actually there is awareness, and that there's compassion within it. So I want you to talk about the fact that we, in our human-centered way, that there may be vast intelligences that are woven, that are in the universe, and all, that's just one example, in all kinds of ways that we're currently not seeing. but maybe you can tell us how we can better see it.
I don't think there's any question about that. We live in an enchanted world. We are products of that world. Evolutionarily speaking, we've hardly arrived. I mean, in terms of geological time, never mind cosmological time. Human beings, like, are kind of an afterthought. It just happened, it's like, and we've come a long way even since the last receding of the ice age, the age of the glaciers, which was only 10 or 15,000 years ago. And all of what we call history or civilization has come in that time. And the world that was inhabited by the people of that era, hunters and gatherers, on the very edge of survival, lived in very, very small bands, very small groups, very small numbers altogether on the planet, apparently. And they were part of what David Abram calls who's a wonderful sleight of hand musician and anthropologist and philosopher, calls the more than human world. See, so we grew up in a world where we were the pipsqueaks, we were the weaklings. I mean, the mammoths that were running around, and the crocodiles. We had to be very careful just to be able to survive in this world. And we were very clever, and we managed through hunting and gathering to learn how to be at one with nature. But we lived in a very magical world where, all the animals spoke. One could learn to actually understand their languages to a certain kind, and they tell you when danger is around. The birds can tell you that, or sort of leaves can tell you certain kinds of things. All of these ways of reading nature have been completely obliterated once we developed alphabets. And Merleau-Ponty, the great French philosopher, talks about this, and is part of a field of philosophy called phenomenology. And now with mindfulness and meditative awareness, there's what's called neurophenomenology, and the phenomenal work of Francisco Varela, who I know you knew, and is part of the Mind and Life. He started the Mind and Life Institute with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. That there's this whole appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things. So we can build on that and realize that as a species, we're in our infancy. And we've made it this far. We've caused an enormous amount of havoc. I mean, just the enormous amount of havoc in the name of religion, in the name of my God versus your God, in the name of my empire versus your empire. At the same time, there's been enormous flourishing of beauty of all forms of artistic expression, music, social, worlds that have been created. I mean, one only has to read Black Elk Speaks to realize how, the sort of culture of the Native Americans in certain domains of North America, and how that sacred hoop, as he spoke about it, was ruptured by the coming of these people with a very different skin and a certain kind of cleverness that invented guns and alcohol.
Do you know the seven fire prophecy?
No, I don't.
So this amazing prophecy of the Anishinaabe people. And it dates. The dating is somewhere between like 1100 and 1400. So, but basically it says there are going to be seven fires, and the first one is that we come out of the ocean, and then these white people are going to arrive, and they're going to have all this technology and knowledge, and if they come with a face of peace, when you connect our ancient wisdom and their skills and technology, we will create an amazing flourishing on earth. But if they come with weapons and war, then there will be this destruction. And the 7 prophecies, the 7 phases of the prophecies then prophesize everything that happened from then on. That our children will be taken from us and essentially sent to boarding schools, that they will destroy our languages, etc. And that ultimately our elders will lose the way too. And that takes you, and it takes you all the way to the 6th prophecy. And then the 7th prophecy is, so there is a time that is the time of now, by the way,
Yeah.
in which they recognize that their ways are not working. We, meanwhile, the native peoples, will significantly lost our way. And it'll be interestingly our young people, not our elders, who will rediscover the way. And if at that time the white people can combine with the just the remaining DNA, this, the part of our wisdom that has survived all this, they'll be at a juncture of 2 roads. And one is a road that's described as in which brothers and sisters, it's very,
In that language.
not male. We will walk down that road towards, this beautiful world of rejuvenation, regeneration. And if the white people are not able to choose this wisdom at that time, or if we don't have the wisdom to give to them, then the road will be a black path in which we will be walking barefoot down cinders and scar our feet. And so we're at that point now.
Mm.
And that wisdom, so the worldview that you're describing has existed in thousands of cultures across tens of thousands of years.
Yeah.
So the way we are functioning now is dominant, but it's not the only one. There is within the human capacity, the capacity to think relationally, to be multidimensional aware, and to act with compassion and respect for the whole. And in fact, what we see from the native traditions is when they did that there are, for example, they've now found that the areas of the Brazilian rainforest that are the most biodiverse are the ones that were the most settled. And that biodiversity actually comes from humans gardening the rainforests. And we know, for example, the Western forest didn't burn because the Native Americans would every year do these annual burns that kind of kept it in balance. And so, so there is within the human being the capacity to live wisely. And now is our moment of truth to see if we can discover that in a contemporary way. Now, you have also pointed out that we're at another transition. So I'd like to talk, put these 2 transitions together. And that is from an analog world to a digital world.
Yeah.
So the question is, is the emerging digital world so technological that it's going to take us even further from the ancient wisdom, or is there a way that it can bring us closer?
Well, this is like the gigantic koan, if you will, of the human race. Because, even in my lifetime, in our lifetime, even in the latter 2 decades of our lifetime, the world has changed irreversibly in ways that were virtually unimaginable before, where every person on the planet basically seems to have a supercomputer in their pocket, something that took more than a gigantic building to house in the 1940s and was really unimaginable except by, a few people in the 1930s, mathematicians, and people who were first thinking about computation and how computation was related to thought, and then manufacturing. So this is the challenge of our species at the moment. We call ourselves Homo sapiens sapiens, the species that is from the Latin sapere, which means to taste. So that direct experiencing, to taste or to know. So a banana by biting into it, not by reading the description in the Encyclopedia of Bananas. What a banana is: 1 bite, 1 taste, and you know far more. That kind of knowing, that's not cognitive. That's not, doing a chemical analysis of what the various ingredients of the banana are. That's like you bite into the banana, you know the banana. You apprehend what's in front of you, whether it's trees or whether it's sky or whether it's ocean, and you know it. You don't have to know the chemical composition of the atmosphere. And this kind of direct experiencing is absolutely critical at this point on the planet, but it can't be a small number of people in monasteries who are doing meditation, even if they're meditating for the sake of the rest of the planet, of all beings. It has to be a distributive function that basically ignites passion in everybody to take responsibility for being the one cell that I am in the larger body of not just the planet and life, but of possibility for future generations, for minimizing our own capacity for violence, ignorance, greed, and delusion, and maximizing our capacity to recognize the interconnectedness, and then learn the music of that, learn how to dance with that music, even if it feels awkward at first, because you're not privileging yourself. And in not privileging yourself, you're privileging yourself, because there is no that self that you think you are, because of that deep relationality, that interconnectedness. And that's a kind of geometry, and it's at the same time, it's a kind of poetry, it's multidimensional. And I have a profound optimism that we as human beings are capable of this because of everything that you said about what's transpired before us in the time before technology and so forth. But we need to do it in a way that doesn't destroy the magic and the mystery. I mean, even language. I'm wagging my tongue here, in Massachusetts, and moving air in the room, and it's going into some kind of microphone, and it's going through like space and time, and it's winding up in everybody's ear who's listening at the moment, 257 people. And those air vibrations in your room are actually moving, you're oscillating your tympanic membrane, just being picked up on by auditory nerves. And you're actually following this sentence, and it's totally grammatical. And I have no understanding whatsoever of how that's happening. So don't tell me we're not already magical, mystical beings. We totally are. We have almost no understanding of who we actually are. But when we begin to appreciate it in a non-self-centered way, then all of a sudden we can apprehend what the challenges are that we're facing, but also what the resources are that we might bring to bear, whether they're analog or digital, to serve in the kind of way that you're pointing out. And I have deep confidence that we're capable of that, but it really does require what I call an orthogonal, because I went to MIT and I was trying to get a lot of these points across even 60 years ago. So I felt I had to use MIT kind of language, an orthogonal rotation in consciousness, which is really what waking up to the hidden dimensions that we're talking about, and manifesting them so that everything's the same as it was before. It's not like meditation changes everything, or mindfulness all of a sudden heals or makes everything go away. No, everything is exactly the same as it was before, including you, except totally different because you've been willing to show up in embodied wakefulness, in embodied form, with no attempt, no forcing, no striving, because it's your true nature. It's your birthright. And you can't have 10% of the population doing it. You can't have 40% of the population engaging in this way. We need 90. It's almost like with vaccination for COVID,
Right.
60 or 70% fully vaccinated, not actually good enough, because the virus, which is just a piece of DNA, RNA in this case, it's not even alive. Somehow it has its own awareness of possibility. And wherever there's an opening, it will mutate. It'll create some kind of new variant and continue to do us in. And COVID, I mean, it could be 20 times worse than COVID, and it's not personal because these things aren't even alive. Viruses are not alive. So there's an enormous amount to be learned at every level of human understanding about the possibility of us, in some sense, recognizing what our karmic assignment of the moment is, that perhaps the entire evolutionary pathway has been leading this way, and taking the digital and the analog and bringing them together in a way, because we can't get rid of the digital. I mean, much as, it's a gigantic distraction and toxic in so many ways, but could it be used by people who actually have analog bodies? Because even the people who invented all the digital stuff, they all have bodies. They're going to die. Although I know a lot of them want to migrate to disk so that they'll be immortal forever, but they're going to die.
But that'd be a kind of flat experience living on a disk.
So the question is, can we bring this awakening to the planet in a way that will benefit not just humanity, but the forces that keep humanity in balance with all life and even inorganic cycles of, oxygen and nitrogen and carbon and all of that kind of stuff, so that we can actually discover, uncover, recover the full dimensionality of what it means to be human. And of course, we don't know what that means, but it's a koan. But the sort of poetic reaches of it, whether it's through Rumi or through Shakespeare or through Dante or through Mozart or through Marie Curie and through, sort of like Martha Graham or, sort of whoever, the sort of the great poets, the great insights of humanity in every culture, from every continent. I think that's our karmic assignment at the moment. And so I feel like, and in some sense, the reason I do what I do is to kind of continually sort of explore the germinal seeds that, when nurtured or ignited or fired up in a certain kind of way, will lead to breakthrough insights that will galvanize us as humanity, so that we no longer want to spend all our time othering everybody else, disrespecting everybody that doesn't look like us, and then killing them, or creating unfortunate cycles of foreign policy repetition that embody ignorance, that can be seen a mile off. Once you've had the experience of Saigon, for instance, you could see Kabul coming, 20, 30 years off. But without the kind of realization of interconnectedness, you'll keep looping back to making the same old mistakes in ever more creative, stupid ways that lead to the same result. And that result is really pain and suffering. And it's not like it's terminal. I don't want to say, it's like absolute in that way. We'll keep learning, we'll keep doing. We have to sometimes make infinite mistakes, but lots of people die every time we make a mistake.
Right.
And the lots of harm is caused. At the same time, lots of good is also caused, in terms of like, women in Afghanistan, for instance, have been empowered in ways that were just not part of the equation 20 years ago, and we'll see where that all goes. But we're in a very, very multi-dimensional script here, where we just don't know what the outcome, but we do have to tilt things in the direction of minimizing harm and maximizing well-being.
So that mental model, the capacity to minimize harm and accentuate well-being, to me comes from the paradigm of our time. And when 9/11 happened, we actually, I think, took an incredible step backwards, because George Bush said, "You're either with us or against us."
Yeah.
And when in fact we know that it was impossible for people to be with us or against us. There were families all across the Middle East who were trapped between the Taliban and ISIS and the Americanization and the force of their kids wanted to be educated. And they had to navigate this huge complexity of in which standing so black and white with one side or the other would be self-destruction. But furthermore, that mental model, that black and white mental model of it's either this or that, you're either good or bad, the empires of evil, so it goes way beyond just the political. Well, it manifested it more in the political. So we see much less nuance, much more division. So there was a paradigm. Imagine if instead George had said, what this shows us is that we're all in it together, and that we so anyway, in these moments and in these times, we plant these seeds, these cultural seeds that grow, that have enormous karmic consequences and grow astoundingly. So now there is a new seed is being planted, and we see it all over the world. There's a paradigm of relationality, and it's coming out of ecology, and it's coming out of science, it's coming out of quantum physics, it's coming out of the meditation world and spiritual world, it's coming out of the social justice world. But it seems to me the next step is we have
and the nature of forests and
the nature of forests,
permafrost,
all these things. So it feels to me, though, that we have to weave them together to have collective impact. Early, one of the first things you said is we need to find a creative equilibrium, and it feels to me like these things are not yet affecting the global, what I call the cognitive ecology. So there's like a biological ecology, but we live in this ecology of ideas and thoughts as such. It's collective, it's co-evolves just the way the physical ecology does. It's a cognitive ecology. So here's my question, because you've been doing this for a long time and you've been planting a lot of seeds. So what do you see? How do you take it to the level where the seeds interconnect and they begin to create a new wave, a new paradigm?
Well, my short answer would be any way you can. I'll just start with 42 years ago when I started what's called mindfulness-based stress reduction. The idea that you could bring relatively intensive Buddhist meditation practice, and in parenthesis, kind of without the Buddhism, which means just in its non-dual frame. So it doesn't have to be identified as an ism of any kind, but not dumbed down or diluted. The idea of bringing meditation in 1979 into the mainstream of medicine practice and medical teaching was considered tantamount to, as I like to say, the Visigoths are at the gates of the citadel of Western civilization, about to completely destroy it. 42 years and counting later, it's like medicine and meditation, ho-hum. I mean, it's like, and yoga even, it's like completely accepted. I mean, every insurance company, you see, they have yoga on their websites. They have meditation on their websites. They're teaching meditation in medical school. Hey, the words actually sound a lot alike, don't they? It took 40 years for people to recognize that this was not a threat to the perspective of mainstream medicine, but it actually expanded the domain of mainstream medicine in that orthogonal rotation kind of way. This adds another dimension, the dimension of presence, the dimension of compassion, the dimension of interconnectedness and relationality in terms of doctor versus patient, so you don't do unwitting harm as the big authority who in some sense really doesn't recognize the suffering of the patient or address the full dimensionality. All that's changed in medicine, and people would have said it was impossible. I mean, impossible. And it's not just happened in one medical school, it's like global. Okay, and it's just the beginning. Now, yes, there's a good deal of hype around mindfulness now, and a lot of people kind of claiming to be mindfulness teachers that may not be able to spell the word. But for the vast majority of what's going on, including the science, it's credible enough to get started. Okay, so that says, in answer to your question, that says to me, well, if you can do that, you can do basically anything. If we actually appeal to what's deepest and best in people, we've had enough of this crap. This ussing and theming, Democrats and Republicans, the good versus the bad, the whites versus, everybody else. I mean, it's like there's a certain kind of arrogance and self-centeredness that we know is deluded and not true. And what's required is waking up. The beauty of waking up is it doesn't take any time. You use the example of 9/11 and because it just happened a couple of days ago, the 20th anniversary. When 9/11 happened, there were 5 weeks when nothing happened after it happened. There was no response from the United States. And I really was hoping, because it was totally deluded, that they would recognize the opportunity to do something really orthogonal, rather than just punch back, the tough, hard martial art, sort of karate punch in the face in response to 9/11, which is what they eventually came up with in totally incompetent way. But something that actually, because the attackers, it was so unthinkable taking planes from Logan Airport, where I fly out of all the time, and, capturing them and driving, flying them into the towers, and killing everybody. Those 19 hijackers, they solved a certain kind of Zen koan for themselves. Nefarious as it was, they did something outside of all the playbooks. It was like astonishing to everybody, completely surprising. And what did they do? They took down the Twin Towers, the embodied, sort of symbolism of global capitalism, and they split the ring of the Pentagon with the other plane, or at least attempted to. So there was a symbolism there as well as the death and destruction. And we had an opportunity to really respond to that level of message and despair on the part of, and delusion and violence on the part of those people in a way that would not have just merely taken the hit and said, ho hum, show us what you got. That's nothing. Because of course it's horrible and the loss is incredible. But to find a way to actually respond rather than react that would have taught the entire world a lesson about force, power, compassion, and wisdom not being orthogonal to each other, not being contradictory to each other. And of course, that was impossible for that to happen with the people in the cabinet at that time. But it still remains a possibility, because 20 years and trillions of dollars later, what did this engagement show us that, we said we would never do again after Vietnam? And we just did it again in a kind of different, more, way. We don't know our own limitations on one level, and we don't know our own creativity on an entirely different level. If only we could mobilize that in ways that, again, come back to the same principle: optimize well-being and minimize harm. Doesn't mean you totally accept an attack like that, but how do you do a surgical, precision-based, apparently, we could have gotten bin Laden and his group in Tora Bora, and there's all sorts of contradictory stories about what went on and how did we let him escape, because the intelligence apparently was very good that where he was located. And it would have been a cost to it, but it wasn't like, 20 years of warfare in, 2 countries, one of which, they lied about weapons of mass destruction to the UN, and watched Colin Powell do it. And I thought, like, of all the people in the cabinet, Colin Powell would have some integrity, and you could just see him lying. It was like, it was so patently obvious, but there's huge prices. So this is where mindfulness, if you will, or ecology, or, planetary health, it's like, if we said we can't be healthy in an in a sick world, where's the sickness lie? It lies in the mind that doesn't know itself. It
Right.
lies in the heart that doesn't know how to express itself in ways that are illuminating and enlivening and authenticating of relationality and love, and instead get lost in anger, violence, hatred, and stuff like that. That's a yoga. We need to exercise that muscle of, attending and nurturing what is, and I don't have a script for how to do that. I mean, I just said a few things about, September 11th, but who knows? I mean, none of us know. But if all of us contribute as cells of the one body politic, then maybe it's going to be possible for the world itself to come up with all sorts of creative stuff, because the world needs all its flowers, and every single one of us flourishes at our best in a way that illuminates all the other flowers. It's like the metaphor of Indra's net, the great god Indra in the Hindu pantheology and Buddhist pantheology, where every node in the net is a multifaceted diamond, and each facet of each diamond reflects every other diamond in the net. So profound interconnectedness, and that interconnectedness is actually, in the realizing of it, in awareness, is compassion.
So we have seen through many histories that in many ways, Western culture is traumatizing. We see it in slavery, we see it in racism, we see it in exploitation, we see it in the sexual abuse, we see it in all kinds of ways. So this waking up, are we all equally wake upable in our current state, or is there precedent work, for example, in the healing of trauma or other things that we need to undergo first?
I don't know. I think everybody has to answer that question for themselves. And the way you answer a question like that is you ask it a lot. And maybe you don't even try to force an answer cognitively, but you just listen deeply to the question. And if you care about that question, so for instance, we talked some about Native Americans, and if you're talking about the history of slavery in this country, or if you consider how the world got populated and who the winners were and who the losers were and all of this kind of thing, blanking on the name at the moment, but the sort of forces of quote unquote civilization that were so destructive of native peoples around the world, they didn't need any meditation to tell them what was going on. I mean, it was patently obvious to them, right? It was the kind of the breaking of the sacred hoop, the enslaving of human beings, and the taking of bodies, and then dehumanizing, doing our best to dehumanize, and white people doing their best to dehumanize it, so that even the founder of, the writer, main writer of the Declaration of Independence, bought and sold people. I wasn't taught that in school when I studied American history. It wasn't even mentioned, never mind emphasized, the contradictions. Even that everybody signed the Declaration of Independence was a man. History is, evolves. How we understand it evolves. So what was sacred history in the 50s, for instance, when I was in elementary school, it's now completely contaminated by views that were sort of the dominant views of a small number of very, very privileged white people who wrote the Constitution and who wrote it to privilege white people. Men, I mean, it says in the Declaration of Independence, that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that's what it's all about. But when it got to writing the Constitution, it became life, liberty, and property. Pursuit of happiness got thrown out. Why? Because, hey, it's like, we don't want that riffraff taking our stuff. We're the ones that created this beautiful country. Screw them. And there was the Shays Rebellion, all sorts of other things you don't learn in school, even about American history. So we have our work cut out in terms of even whose worlds are we talking about? Black people don't need to be told to be mindful about how things are in their world. Native Americans don't need any white people to help them along in understanding the deep interconnectedness of the universe. In fact, it's a travesty if white people do that in a certain way, because it's a kind of what sometimes goes as cultural appropriation. It's like, hey, help your pathetic white people, friends, and don't bother us. So, but that's when I said, when the world needs all its flowers, I mean all its flowers, the ones that look like us, the ones that don't look like us, and that we don't presume that we know what's good for the Afghans or for the Sunnis or the Shias or, the sort of whoever it is, that we in fact try as best we can by example to ignite passion in possibility for true liberation and freedom. Okay, that's what the Declaration of Independence says about freedom, but mindfulness is about freedom too. The freedom to not be deluded, the freedom to not be captured by your own ignorance and greed and anger and hatred and feeling of I don't get enough and they get, and then those narratives that like just obliterate everything and entangle us forever. This can be liberated in no time. That's the beauty of the meditation practice. Now, and we're all each other's meditation teachers. So in that sense, it's not like, oh, I have to find the right teacher someplace in the right tradition. It's not, every tree, every bush, every bird, every cloud, everybody on the internet in one way or another. There's nobody that can't be your teacher of something about wakefulness when you wake up to the actuality of it, even if the next moment you shut it down because it's so toxic. It's taught you something. It's taught you something about where you don't want to go. And this is kind of like a discipline. It's exercising a certain kind of muscles. You have to do it you have to engage in it with a high degree of intentionality, even though the most transformative element of it's not instrumental, where you just work and work and work and you get better and better at being a meditator, but it's non-instrumental. There's no improving on you because you're perfect as you are, including all your imperfections. So swallow that one and then see what happens when you metabolize it. And that's really the invitation. It's a radical act of love, I would say, to drop in on yourself. And as soon as you drop in on what you think of as yourself or your body or your breath or your mind, you're actually in touch with the entire universe. And that means that it's highly relational and it's not, it doesn't end at the envelope of your skin. And therefore, hey, how often do you not listen to your children or your grandchildren or your partner or your spouse or the people who you pay to do a certain kind of work? How often do you actually not listen to them, or maybe even don't see them except in an instrumental way where they're doing some function that enhances you or whatever? And then that awareness isn't caught in any of that. So that gives you a new degree of freedom to actually live life in a different way, construct work in a different way. See where work takes you if you took that kind of perspective. And that kind of learning leads to, when we do this with medical patients in MBSR, any time that you actually drop in and fall awake, you learn something about yourself, about the world, about the interface between no self and world, or no world and no self, but just the construct of our imaginations, which is not smart enough to really understand even a sunset, never mind, rainforest. But when you've learned something, what does that learning do to you? We don't talk about this enough in education, but it grows something in you. It plants a kind of seed. Maybe it's a passion for wanting to know more, or how that connects with this, or this connects with that. That's, of course, all killed on exams that ask you to compare and contrast in college. It's just like denatured. But when you learn something and then you grow as a result of that, then what unfolds from that growing is a certain kind of healing, which in my working definition is a coming to terms with things as they are. So no point in living in a fantasy world where all this talk about global warming isn't true, or whatever you don't like isn't true, or anything you think isn't true. I mean, there's a bumper sticker. I saw a bumper sticker recently that said, "Don't believe everything you think." My bumper sticker is, "Don't believe anything you think." Until it is rounded out by your other multiple dimensions of intelligence, thinking by itself is very, very dangerous and suspect, especially if you're attached to your ideas. So out of this coming to terms with things as they are, which is, as I was saying, my working definition of healing, even healing in a moment from like whatever arises in your family in a moment where you contract and feel hurt, feelings get hurt, or whatever it is, or there's some major thing that you have to face. And having a body and having a mind, it's true for all of us. It's like the full catastrophe of the human condition: stress, pain, and illness. But when you relate to it through this arc of learning, growing, healing without forcing anything, then what follows healing is transformation. You're the same person you always were, and you're not. You have a much, much bigger perspective. Your relationship to the personal pronouns changes. Even if you have a little contraction around it every now and then, it's very different from when it's all about me. Because you know that it's not all about you, even when you think it is. And therefore, you can have a planetary awareness that then is medicine for the planet. It's the same medicine as for the human being, for the person. So there's not that much separation. And it really comes down to healing the whole, W-H-O-L-E, which is the root meaning of the word health.
So John, we got lots of questions, so I want to get
Oh
some
yes,
to you.
let's stop for questions.
And
I just like talking with you. You know, it's fun to have these
I
conversations.
know.
So
but anyway,
I apologize for going on so long.
But these are amazing questions, some of them. So we're going to try and answer them briefly, so we can get to a bunch of them.
Okay.
So this one I'm going to break into two questions. The philosopher of religion, Houston Smith, said it is the job of every generation to pass on to youth its wisdom symbols of the culture, because human beings live by innovation and not instinct. If one generation messes up, the culture will have to start all over.
Say that again.
This says that Houston Smith says that the elders are responsible to pass on wisdom and the symbols of wisdom to the next generation.
Okay.
Because if they don't, then if there's this break, then the next generation has to start all over without that wisdom.
Well, it's funny that that's the first question, because I actually knew Houston Smith. He was a professor of philosophy and religion at MIT when I was, and he played a seminal role in my life because he invited a Zen master, an American Zen master named Philip Kaplow, to come to speak at MIT in 1965. And I happened to see the sign advertising the seminar called The Three Pillars of Zen, which was the name of the book that came out the next year that he wrote. And that seminar changed the entire course of my life. Only 4 people went to that seminar. Aside from Houston Smith and the speaker, there were only 4 people at all of MIT. But it changed the direction of my life. So yeah, the elders really do have to take responsibility for it. But you know, sometimes the elders are like washed up. They're depressed. They are you know, self-preoccupied with how the world is going to, you know, speak about them when they're gone. So they're in a certain way looking to the past rather than appreciating that the real job of eldering is to ignite this kind of passion for wakefulness, embodied wakefulness and wisdom and compassion in the young'uns. Right. And that's what, that's the big adventure. That's the adventure of culture, is passing on the culture, the wisdom, and then trusting that really when it comes right down to, we don't know shit, and let the next generation decide for themselves what it is that was worth taking from the elders, but trusting in their own creativity to actually bring that together with the part that they want to reject from the other, the elders, and create something. If the principles have to do with wakefulness, kindness, compassion, and non-harming, ahimsa in Gandhi's terminology, the power of that is really limitless as far as I can see. And that's exactly what we need for planetary health at this particular moment in time. And so I think as elders, all of us who, just like lived so long that we now get seen as elders by other people if we don't see, even if we don't see ourselves that way, that we have an even greater responsibility than ever before, not to retire and go to some mountaintop and just, seek as much bliss as possible, but to actually ignite passion in those young'uns for investigating who they are and what their, if I dare to put it this way, true karmic assignment is in this world. Okay, and do that, and don't do anything else, even if everybody else thinks you're crazy, and your parents want you to become a lawyer or a doctor, which nobody wants anymore, but or a tech engineer or whatever, a Google billionaire. Do what your heart is telling you to do, and as Joseph Campbell once said, follow your bliss. That's trustable. It's trustworthy. So that's what I would say in response to that. Yeah, it's a lineage. Everything is a lineage. I mean, and honor your parents, honor your grandparents, even if you hate them. And seriously, because they couldn't be anybody that they couldn't be anybody but who they were. But the question is, who are you?
And we have the DNA of our lineages in us.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
another question. What are your suggestions? Just a second, this blinks. What are your suggestions for bringing mindfulness into the social and political engagement? How can political movements apply the understanding of mindfulness and interconnectedness as they oppose injustice and oppression? And integrated in that question is, what do you do with anger against injustice?
Well, I'll answer the second one. First, you transmute it. You recognize where that anger is coming from. And really, probably where it's really coming from is love for a different possibility, love for those who are being harmed, intolerance of a status quo that is toxic. So that's a form of tough love. But this is where the rubber meets the road, and that we can actually address those kinds of issues only if we don't lose our minds when we most need them. And when we fall into anger, of course, the first thing that happens is we become inflamed and we contract. You can practice this all you like and see how it goes. And the more you practice, of course, the more you get better at it. You practice anger, even if it's self-righteous anger or self-righteousness, the better you're going to get at being self-righteous. And the problem isn't the righteousness or whether you're right, the problem's the self. Right. So when you can see self in other, then you have a whole new dimension in which to grow. And that dimension is going to allow you to see things that otherwise were not visible before.
So another question is, if us versus them is an illusion, is we an illusion, or is we have more substance, or is that even the wrong way to think about it?
I don't know. I think you're saying that about, is it the wrong way to think about it? I would have to answer from thought that I don't know. But I would say that my intuition is that there are multiple ways of knowing, and that sometimes not filling the space with great ideas, but letting things just marinate in not knowing is really important. So the most important thing that any of us can know is what we don't know, and to really keep that in awareness so that we are, in some sense, modest and modulated in how we respond in very toxic situations, and then trust in a certain kind of emergence that we learn as we go. And or I could say, since I said that whole concatenation of things, we learn as we grow, or we grow as we learn. And so it's a moving target, and then we learn from each other. It's so deeply interconnected that we learn from our grandchildren. We learn from the people we most don't want to talk to. We're always talking to the same old who already know what we're going to say and probably like it. What about going and finding somebody who has a complete, a completely opposite view, and then talking to them about why they want to recall the governor of California because they don't have any water to feed their cows, and they don't like the way he's been dealing with that situation. Because completely understandable if you were a farmer that invested in wanting to feed your cows and keep your family business going. Yeah, so he falls on the side that you can't understand, but you don't grow cows, and you don't live in California in the desert or whatever it is. So this is where the collective intelligence is of equal, if not more important value than our individual. So we need to learn to listen to each other, and in particular, the people who are hurting the most and who are the angriest, and find ways to actually meet the moment that honor the source of that hurt. It's always underneath anger. It's always fear. And who's to say that they're beyond fear? So it's kind of a unifying emotion in a certain way. But when we lash out because of our fear, or we elect somebody who's going to destroy, every semblance of democracy as a short-term measure to, that's not going to help anything on the planetary level. That's delusion. And we need, and of course, we're all deluded. So I think I pointed towards it earlier, but I really want to say we need each other big time. We need to learn to listen to each other. And when somebody says, John, you're really off, I need to take that into account. I don't say, well, I just discount that person. No, really brutally, in some kind, compassionately, but brutally honest with each other about where we feel somebody might be off. But to a very large extent, the more we live in this domain of recognizing the urgency and our tendency to apply band-aids where what we really need is something much more healing and profound, an orthogonal rotation in consciousness, then we can transform not just medicine, but medicine for the whole world, medicine for the planet, but an authentic Hippocratic medicine that's embodied and not one that on the side, there were doctors at Auschwitz practicing medicine. Yeah, it wasn't what we would consider Hippocratic medicine. That's true in the United States. There were hospitals in most medicine. There were hospitals for African Americans and hospitals for white people. African American couldn't. That was not that long ago. That was in my lifetime. So this is a wake-up call for humanity.
These disparities exist today. So another question, can you share in practical ways, and you have a lot of experience in this, how can we scale up and bring awareness of contemplative practices into our work life? So how do we scale it? It's interesting because there are a lot of businesses now that are using meditation as almost like a palliative or a relaxant, or it's like part of your health plan to improve your health plan. It's not really about dropping your sense of self and recognizing interdependence and compassion. So this
in a cynical way, I might say it's to help people be more relaxed so that they can speed up the assembly line.
Exactly. But the person who's asking this question is asking it from the point of view of how do we scale up meditation in our workplaces in a way that grows compassion and leadership?
I hear that. Be the change that you want to see. Embody it, not today, but now. Now covers a lot of territory. So if it didn't happen in this moment, you've got the next in-breath, the next moment. So that's, as far as I can see, the best way to do it. That generates a lot of interest and conversation. And if you don't become a proselytizer or an evangelist for mindfulness, which will turn millions of people off to it. Then it turns out there are an enormous number of wells that one might nurture oneself from, nourish from, an enormous number of really remarkable teachers out there who are working at this particular interface, including in the business world, in the corporate world, and also that have, I would say, enormous integrity in that regard, and not going to be sort of seduced or kind of compromised in having the meditation practice be misused to actually perpetrate the same old power structures and same old.
Right. So another question, there's lots of positive reaction to your meditation.
I'm glad to hear that.
Somebody compared
I wish we could see everybody. You know, I just want to say to all of you out there that I far prefer it when I can actually look at everybody's faces, even if I can't. I don't want to go through the various screens.
Yeah,
but
that's a good.
When we see each other, there's something that's recognized that really goes beyond time and space for me. I can hear it in the question and in your being here with us. But I just wanted to say that, again, whenever we sign off, this is not the end of anything. This is actually just the next in-breath.
So that actually leads us to the next question, which is there a way for people to participate in live meditations with you? Not pre-recorded, but are you doing anything weekly or monthly?
I did 3 months of that last year when the pandemic started. I mean, every weekday for an hour, Monday through Friday, and then 2 hours twice a week where we'd break up into small groups. With thousands of people doing that. There are 66 of them that are on YouTube. I never say anything different. It's like, you don't need to keep listening to Jon Kabat-Zinn, because Jon Kabat-Zinn is always saying the same thing. I mean, I'm always saying the same thing. I just try to find a million different ways to say the same thing, but they're all different doors into the same room. And all the meditation practices, by the way, are, as far as I'm concerned, to a first approximation, different doors into the same room. So there's an enormous amount of that on YouTube, and you can find it at Wisdom 2.0 and put in Jon Kabat-Zinn or something like that. And yeah, I am live from time to time, but I don't put a lot of that stuff out on social media, but there's stuff out there and you can find it easily enough. And I thank you for asking that question, because you know, anything that will ignite passion in you for this deep connection with yourself, let me just say to all of you out there, this is non-trivial. It's hard work. It requires a certain kind of discipline just to get your, and I'll put it the way I usually do, your ass on a cushion, metaphorically and especially literally, day in, day out, through hard times, through easy times, through stress, tumultuous, you know, moments in your life. It's a certain kind of discipline, and it's really, really, really important. You are your best life is the meditation instructor, and it really is a love affair, but it does require a certain kind of discipline, a kind of exercising a certain kind of muscle. On the other hand, as I suggested before the guided meditation this time, that it is really life itself that's the meditation practice. So there's no moment that's not the curriculum of the moment for how am I going to be in wise relationship with this.
I want to end with a note I wrote from a previous conversation you and I had. And this is about the narrative about ourselves. And you said, when you really get into it, and you and I talked about the quantum physics of it, where there's no essential particles, that everything dissolves into pure relationality. You said, there's no place to hang your hat. And then you realize you don't even have a hat.
And there's no you to hang it.
Right.
There's no head to put it on.